Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Saturday, the 15th of November, 2025, 771 days since October 7th, 2023. It strikes me that it's been more than 70 years of occupation for the Palestinian people and 771 days of ethnic cleansing and what many experts around the world are calling genocide in Gaza. Speaking of which, the IDF says it's killed a Palestinian who crossed into the yellow line in the south of Gaza. Health groups have also warned that disease will spread after heavy rain in the Gaza Strip caused widespread flooding. It rained significantly overnight and also throughout the day today, Saturday night right now. I'm currently in Nazareth, a Palestinian city in the state of Israel. There is little reported about Gaza these days in so many ways, as the death toll has drastically decreased, which is good news, but people continue to die of injuries from throughout the last 2 years of bombing and attacks by the Israeli military, and the struggles over the utter devastation, access to humanitarian assistance, whether or not this international stabilization force will be established, all of those struggles continue, let alone the utter aftermath of a completely destroyed society, the grief and loss of tens of thousands of deaths, bodies being found regularly under the rubble, and other current realities. CNN had a report today about how the weeks of the Gaza ceasefire have resulted in scores of Hamas fighters who are stuck in tunnels under the Gaza Strip, deep underneath the wreckage of Rafah. In South Gaza, the war is not over, so says CNN. So these Hamas militants have been split into independent cells, and they're actually trapped in tunnels underground beneath Israeli lines. So mediators are trying to figure out what to do about it. The issue of how to deal with up to 200 Hamas militants in the Israeli-occupied part of Gaza, the part beyond the yellow line on the east side, it's more than just a tactical problem. It's actually a political problem. It's a sensitive diplomatic matter with no clear way out. These cells, and it's unclear how many remain or how many people are still alive or where they're located, have fortified themselves into tunnels since the ceasefire on October 10th, divided Gaza along the so-called yellow line a month ago. Israeli occupies territory east of that yellow line, like I talked about. Hamas is reasserting its power on the west side. This was one of the issues Jared Kushner was just in Israel about around this past week. He was meeting with Israeli officials, and Netanyahu said there's no way we're going to let these fighters out without any accountability and recourse. They have been offered amnesty if they turn in their weapons. There hasn't really been a mechanism by which to enforce that transaction, even if they want to accept it. One idea was to deport the militants to a third country. Turkey was considered a possibility, but no solution has materialized. Throughout the week, Netanyahu's office in Israel has been denying many reports that have come out about the release of these terror cells, because Netanyahu will be highly criticized in Israel if these militants are being let go. The prime minister did not commit to Americans to release the prisoners from Rafah, so said a senior official. He said a few hours later, contrary to reports, there's no agreed upon solution. Without a resolution, and again, this is CNN, the cells are a ticking time bomb. Little to no access to food and water. Hamas militants are left with a simple choice: surrender or fight. Mohammed Shahada, a Gaza expert with the European Council on Foreign Relations, told CNN Hamas doesn't even know how many are left that might still be alive. Meanwhile, on the western side of Gaza, where the majority of Palestinian civilians are located, Reuters reported that Hamas is quietly reasserting control as the post-war talks grind on. Day after day, week after week, where is the progress? So the highlights of that article were that Hamas has been levying fees on some privately imported goods, according to Gazans. The government denies raising the taxes, but says it's regulating markets. That's the Hamas government that's running the west side of the Gaza Strip. Now, the U.S. State Department has said Hamas will not govern Gaza. Hamas government says that they are committed to a smooth transition to a technocratic government. So they've expressed this readiness. Hamas has said, we're ready for a technocratic government, but where is it? There's no agreement on the International Stabilization Force. And now a dozen Gazans say they're increasingly feeling the control of Hamas in other ways. Authorities monitor everything coming into areas of Gaza held by Hamas. They're levying fees on some privately imported goods, which includes fuel, cigarettes, and other merchandise. They seem to be overcharging for food or for goods. According to at least 10 Gazans, 3 of them were merchants with direct knowledge of the situation. Ismail Habata, head of the media office of Hamas, said that there are accounts that Hamas is taxing cigarettes and fuel, but he said that was inaccurate, denying that the government has been raising taxes. Meanwhile, Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is said and reportedly to be meeting soon with a top Hamas official to discuss the ceasefire agreement. Khalil al-Hayya is who the chief negotiator of Hamas is. To the date of the meeting is unknown. A representative from Witkoff's office declined to comment about this. In September, Israel struck Qatar's capital, Doha, and targeted al-Hayya. He was one of the people targeted by those strikes on Doha and other Hamas officials. Now, in the occupied West Bank, I just saw an article entitled Smash and Grab about how a man was arrested because of something to do with a Banksy picture, the picture of the girl that's releasing the balloon. Banksy often does this peace street art. But I don't know if this is because I'm in Nazareth, but Al Jazeera's website is blocked where I'm currently at. My computer comes up with an error saying the website's not secure, but it worked in Jerusalem, so it's very odd. I'm at a hotel in Nazareth. I'm sure know there have been issues with Al Jazeera and Israel over the past 2 years. Journalists have been killed in Gaza, in the occupied West Bank. I also know that the Al Jazeera offices, there was a Knesset bill passed about Al Jazeera, et cetera. All that to say, I can't tell you anything more about that article. Today, there were more attacks on Palestinians seeking to harvest olives, and it's important to note this year's olive harvest was horrific just because of the weather. It was the worst olive harvest in years because the summer was so hot and there was so little rain. So the rain here in Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territories has been welcome, whereas in Gaza, it's been devastating. Also, illegal Israeli settlers continue to raid Palestinian villages. They have destroyed fruit trees in the occupied West Bank. They raided the Al-Maliha village, which is west of East Jerusalem, under police protection and held residents before releasing them later. In another attack, Israeli settlers cut down trees in the Firasin village, north of Tulkarem in the north of the West Bank. And a human rights organization named Al-Baydar said that the land has been cultivated for years and constitutes a primary source of livelihood for its owners. These attacks reflect a systematic Israeli policy to put pressure on Palestinian farmers and threaten their economic and social stability. I was just speaking with Palestinian women last night, and one of them has family olive groves, and many families harvest olives not for the sake of selling olive oil or for, selling their olives, but because that's what the family uses throughout the year. And if the olive are not able to be harvested, or because the harvest has been so poor, it means families throughout Palestine, and I would imagine in Israel as well, if their yield is so low, they will have to purchase olive products, olive oil specifically, which will have a significant expense for families. I just wanted to give you some general statistics. The Palestinian government's Wall and Settlement Resistance Commission said that illegal settlers carried out 7,154 attacks throughout the West Bank since October of 23. 33 Palestinians were killed and displaced 33 communities. That's just by settler attacks. Combined settler and army actions caused the death of 1,072 Palestinians and have injured 10,700 others in the last 2 years since October 23. Saudi Arabia has condemned the recent settler violence against Palestinians. And in Jerusalem, the Israeli police and Shin Bet service said they arrested 4 residents suspected of supporting the Islamic State. Iran confirmed its Revolutionary Guards have seized a tanker that was carrying petrochemical cargo bound for Singapore in Gulf waters, Iranian media reported. And this is actually from last month related to Syria. There was a BBC article that talked about how people in Syria said they were killed because they were Alawites. That's the minority group that the former President Assad was a part of. There is fear among minority groups in Syria after the fall of the Assad regime. The killer came by night, a masked man on motorbike who struck without warning and sped away. It's become a familiar pattern in some corners of the new Syria in recent months, as the country's fragility and unity is eroded by revenge attacks and sectarian killings. The main targets are Alawites, the sect that was ousted by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Al-Assad was an Alawite, but this time on October 1st, the victims were Christians. Wissam and Shafiq Mansour, cousins, both 39, they were as close as brothers. As they chatted with a friend over coffee and cigarettes, they were hit by a hail of bullets. Other Middle East updates, President Donald Trump has said on Friday he's considering agreeing to a deal to supply Saudi Arabia with F-35 stealth fighter jets. Hostages released last month are set to visit the White House. They will meet with President Trump next week. On Thursday, according to a source who said that the Israeli government is going to fund the trip, even though they had nothing to do with the planning. Finally, I shared that yesterday we had an event at Bethlehem Bible College with our women's empowerment group called And Still We Rise. And I wanted to take a minute and tell you about that program. It started during an advocacy summit in 2018, where CMEP brought a delegation of Middle Eastern women, mostly Palestinian, to DC to talk about human rights and realities in the OPT and other parts of the Middle East. That delegation had about 15 women, and not only did they speak at the DC Advocacy Summit, which men and women attended, but after that in DC, CMEP sent them all over the United States to speak to churches and universities and seminaries and other public forums about what's happening in the Holy Land, in Palestine, in Israel, in the Middle East. That 2018 legacy launched our women's empowerment program. It's called And Still We Rise. And last year in November, in 2024, we had our first ever Middle East Women's Summit in Jericho. And it was one of the most powerful things I've experienced in my almost 10 years at CMEP. It was really incredible. The first day included men. We wanted them to bless us before we had just time as women. It included the Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Church, Atala Hanna, Bishop Shimali of the Catholic Latin Church, Father Fedi Diab of the Anglican Communion, Pastor Ashraf Tanus of the Lutherans. And the men blessed us. And afterwards, I heard from a lot of my male counterparts, the pastors, in Bethlehem and Ramallah and other places, said, why weren't we invited? And I said, you guys, it was a women's event. I've never seen men so enthusiastic about being invited to a women's gathering. So that event was 3 days. We had over 100 people gathered, about 30 internationals. The rest were Palestinian. And the focus was, what does it mean as women before the eyes of God? Many who are living under occupation and ethnic cleansing, how does that affect us in terms of family, trauma resilience, human rights and advocacy, and a theology of collective liberation? What does Christ call us to in this moment? What does that mean? How do we live out our faith faithfully? So if you'd like to know more about And Still We Rise, we have a report specifically of that November event, but we have our annual reports as well. Please reach out to us at info@cmep.org. It's an incredible program, and we're planning another summit in the Middle East, inshallah, in Jordan in November 2026. So reach out to us. Consider donating to support our women, and that actually funds female staff in the Middle East as well. So may God go before us. May peace come quickly with justice. May the kingdom of God come in the name of Christ. Amen.